Good morning, and today is going to be 10-9 of spades. We are in the small blind 10 NL game. Folds to us, we open raise, and we get a call. So this is blind versus blind. Folded to us, raise first in stat. We're basically raising a lot of hands. I try to make it a point to always raise the suited hands, all the pocket pairs, everything. It's kind of what we're trying to target. So just have a lot. We're targeting all the fold equity. A lot of people tend to overfold, or if they don't overfold on the pre-flop, then they usually do it on the flop. So we raise with a lot. Hopefully we connect to some way and we can make a c-bet. Villain calls in this case. We could look at it. His fold to steal stats 33%. Probably calls a little too much. And that might suggest then that I need to restrict my range a little bit, not play as wide as I am playing. We can see that he does have a 3-bet range. Looks like ace queen, or maybe queens plus ace queen. And he calls a lot. So looking at his call 2-bet from blind range, it looks like he's got offsuit Broadway, ace x hands. It looks like he also has suited hands. So what I did was give him all suited hands, pocket pairs, Broadways, ace x suited, but then we have to take out the hands that I think he's going to 3-bet with. So I think those are going to be the hands that he's going to 3-bet with, which means, you know, when we think about our equity advantage, you can see this light blue line, we're going to be ahead at the very top of our range, but then the rest of our range, we're going to be a little bit closer to him. So I'm going to say this is kind of his calling range. You can see it's 41.9% versus 53.8%. That's our total range. All right, so he calls, and we see a flop of 9-6-5, 2 diamonds. So we flop top pair here. We have a lot of hands. So the general strategy when we go forward with this is, if you have a lot of hands and you decide to c-bet most of the time, you know, have a high c-bet frequency, then on the turn, your barreling frequency is going to be much lower than what its standard is. I've seen some books argue like 70% or 2/3, say 70% c-bet, 70% barrel, and so forth. So like you're always cutting hands out of your range. Well, if I'm gonna c-bet here, let's say 90% of the time, then my barreling range is going to be maybe 30%. But if I check initially, I'd say if I only c-bet 30% of the time, then my barreling range is going to be much higher. And the reason for those are two different reasons. One, if we c-bet less, then our c-bet range should be much stronger, which allows us then to barrel on that turn. Flip side of that is that if we barrel a lot, then we still have a lot of chunky cards in our hand, and we're not going to be able to barrel with those. So we're going to have to really tighten up our range a bit. So what's the plan here? Well, let's take a look. We can go top pair plus for value. There's diamond draws out there, there's straight draws out there. I mean, you could already have a straight. I do think we want to bet. We're in a blind versus blind situation. I think a lot of players tend to overcall. Well, some overcall, some undercall. I think this player, if we look at his fold c-bet stat, 60% in position, 33% out of position, fewer hands. We could say maybe it's 40-50%. So it looks like maybe he doesn't quite call enough, but you know, it's kind of hard to tell. We do have a note where we've played. So he overcalled, raised first in the big blind with 4-3 of diamonds. He was second act. He check called 33% and then check. And he did that with the bottom pair. So it looks like he'll be able to go for bottom pair, which means top pair, I think we go for value. flush draws, open enders. I think our gut shots could be betting. 2-card backdoor flushes are going to add a lot of hands. I do think when it comes to 2-card backdoor flush draws, we're probably doing all of our Broadway hands here. That's definitely we're going to do that a lot. Actually, let's just select all of them and then see if we can narrow it down. I mean, the 7s are going to be good. The 8s are going to be good. The low end of the straights are going to be okay. Like the only ones maybe like 2-3. Even then, we're still drawn to a gut shot. 8-2, king 2. Maybe these. But then we have high card straight. So if we bet and we get a Broadway card, we could have possibly hit. So maybe that. Maybe we're betting about 56% of the time, and we recognize we have a big range. So if we bet this, I think there's going to be a lot of cards that we can continue on. I think there's going to be a lot of cards that we check. If we decided to check this flop, then we're probably going check call with a wider range. So I do think we could possibly bet with, I think we're check calling all of these middle cards here. And that might be it. That might be it. So I think we're just going to call this. Say this is our betting range. I think pot's 8, we could probably go on the lower side, 33%. What do? I did go lower, it's probably closer to 33%. Villain calls. So I think Villain's calling with probably any pair, and we'll give him flush draw, open ender, and I guess we'll give him the gut shot, the 1 and 2 card gut shots too. So he was folding 40% of the time, which I mean that's kind of why we bet, try to get some of those folds. But he didn't. He called. So we go to the turn, king of diamonds. Kind of mixed feelings on that. Diamonds get there. We're not going to be able to continue as much, but it's an overcard. It's a Broadway card, and I think we're going to see bet with a lot of Broadway hands that missed this flop and now picked up a top pair hand. So if we look at, let's take this out. We were c-betting. C-bet 56% of the time. We're probably going to be continuing around that 45, 50% again. I don't think 50%, 56% was overly high, to where we're going to have to scale it back on the turn. So I think we continue betting top pair. I think we've got flushes that we bet. I think now these middle cards we're probably just going to check. I think we're firing the nut and second nut flush draws. So the ace of diamonds, probably the queen of diamonds. Not sure. I don't think we would necessarily go for any lower diamonds, because that's like a lone card. I think we can probably bet again with an open ender and maybe a 2-card gut shot. But the 2-card gut shots we're going to have to be selective on. So you can see that, I mean, at this point, we've become unbalanced a bit in our value versus checking range. So I think at this point, probably we're not going to be betting probably all of our king lows. I think we'll keep king 7, king 8 in our checking range, because if we hit our gut shot, that's great. Oops. So let's get that again. So I think like King 10, having the 10 kicker, I think that's preferred. You can see that reduces what our c-bet range is. We're at 34%. Over pairs, I think we probably bet. I think we bet our 2 pairs or sets. If we get raised, I think we're probably going to be massively tightening up here. So I think because of that, maybe we include the jack as our nut flush and help balance it. I don't think we're going to do all of them though. Just like our gut shots, I don't think we're going to include those, but I think these we can include. And maybe the ace 8, ace 7. Because if an ace comes on the river, we beat all of those that had like a 1 pair hand. And that might be good. That's at 45%, which I think is probably appropriate for our sizes. And we're about half value, half bluff. Notice that 10-9 is no longer in our betting range, so I think we should be checking this. I bet. I think this is a mistake. And then villain calls again. So at this point, I'm not sure if he's going to be calling with all of his pairs. I do think he'll continue with his flush draws. We'll say he'll go down to jacks as well. I think he'll probably continue with his open ender. I don't think he's continuing with gut shots. We could say top pair plus is his bet. His call. We'll just leave it there. If we find out that he is playing under pairs, that's going to change it, because then that means if he's calling with any pair, now we're looking at something like that, and that's almost 80% versus 35%. Now he's calling with a whole lot more cards, and it'll make sense for us to go for a lot of value. I do think people will call with these pocket pairs, 10s and jacks, and I think once they call with the 9, they might call again. So we'll give them 50%. And then rivers d8, gut shot gets there. Gut shot gets there. So 7 completes our straight. What hands, if we bet, what hands are going to call? We will say he will only call that he'll finally give up on his middle pair. But jacks and 10s, he'll call, even with the 7 connecting. That's 71%. He's only folding not even 30% of the time. I think most of his range looks like it's flush. Most of his calling range would be flush. So I think our betting range, I think we're going to have value range for the ace high and our queen high flushes. I don't think we're going to be betting. Well, if he calls with all of that, then yeah, we would get value from all of those hands. So yeah, I guess we would. We'd go for a little bit of value with the flush. We'd go for a little bit value with the straights, but that's probably about it. That's going to be 45%. Our sets are going to be questionable. And we could get value, just kind of depends on how low does he call. So, you can see we're a little bit tighter up there, straight, and then we'll bluff with just a nothing hand, something that completely misses here. Maybe even a weak pair type hand. So we've been like 50-50, and I think that's probably what we're gonna try to target. So we're at 63%. That might be just a little high. So we may have to kind of pull back like some of the flush. Maybe not bet, you know, these very bottom ones. I checked, so I think that's a good decision for my hand. And villain checks behind. So we show a 9. Villain shows king queen. Does he have king queen in his hand? Nope. Because I didn't include it here. I didn't put in his overcards. So if he has overcards, let's see how that changes it. He's calling, you know, now he's calling with just overcards. So 84%. King of diamonds hits. Now he does hit top pair quite a bit. You know, if we say middle pair plus, and if he's just calling with king queen, well, he's calling to hope that hit that turn. I don't think he's gonna call turn and river. I wish I had more notes on him about what he does beyond that flop, because it's almost looking like he'll call more. It's more likely to call on the flop than turn and river. And then we bet again, but I don't think we should. Not with all of our top pair hands. Our top pairs, the kings. And he would have definitely called the turn because of the diamond. So I mean, we're not looking at fold equity. We're just looking at everything else. Would he have called with it with a queen jack or an ace queen or an ace jack in this spot? Well, he wouldn't have ace queen, but that's the question. So that's a hand. I do think I probably made the mistake by betting the turn. I think that's a scary card. Kind of doesn't really improve my hand as much. So I think our hand could be a check call. We check call to protect against a bluff. If we check and then he bets the river again, we're probably just going to fold our 9. So I'm curious, what would GTO suggest? And GTO actually suggested checking most of the time here. So we had 9-10. There it is. We do have some bets here with the club, but overall it looks like villain is arguing for a check most of the time. So GTO would say we're actually c-betting too much. And you can see that even with the straight, we're not always betting. Sets, we're not always betting. Yeah, it looks like it's maybe like 60% bet with the straight, 60% bet with the set. A 2 pair, it looks like we're favoring checking 63 to 48%. Looks like over pair, that's going to be like over 3.5 to 1. So we're checking, you know, almost 80% of the time. 2 pair, we're checking about that same amount. So overall, it's going for a check. And I guess if we bet 4, I didn't change the bet sizes. I just left it at 50%. So if we bet and villain calls, which is what he did, then we're betting, you know, 58%, because we should in theory be betting a stronger range. And 9-10 here, if we had him bet, which I guess we didn't, a very small percentage. Yeah, you could see about 5% of the time we can bet. If we do bet, we're not, and we get called, we're not betting those at that point. So the turn, even if we kind of figured out our play and said, yeah, we're checking, but we're gonna have 5%, and that 5% we do bet like we did this time, then we are just going to be checking the turn. So I'm going to say the turn check was definitely a mistake. The flop, I think, was probably a mistake as well. So he calls here, and then I think 8 of clubs. And then we're checking 67% of the time. So in theory, we shouldn't have 10-9 because we should have checked it. So what would have happened? So we bet, and I kind of think villain's probably going to check again, check behind. Once we check villain's range, I mean, he's got a pretty big range. He's arguing 51% bet, so it's looking like he's betting basically top pair plus, and then flush draws, open enders, gut shots. Not all gut shots. Doesn't look like. Let's see here. It's kind of ace high hands. It's ace X. Looks like we're not necessarily betting. Kind of keeping the ace X in our checking range. So if an ace comes, we could conceivably have it. It's about 50-50, 50 bet, 50 call. If he bets, what do we do with our hand? I mean, we have top pair, so I kind of assumed we were calling, and that's what we would have. And then we check. Once we check the flop, we're usually always checking the turn. That seems to be what GTO is recommending. Now we can mix it up to kind of throw people off. If we think our play is going to really throw somebody off, we could always lead, kind of get them to make a major mistake. I think once he bets, and he's supposed to be betting about 68% of the time. So if he bets a second time when that king comes out, I probably would have called again. Because he still have the middle pair. We're still, we could easily kind of represent that we have that 9. So let's say we did do that. We called, and then we check again. And if he bets, I think at that point we're probably folding. And that is right. Once our 9s, we're usually, we're going to be folding. Because, 3 times, he's representing straight. What if he checks, though? So flop goes check, bet, call. Turn goes check, check. What do we do? I do think our 9s are probably going to be a check, but I think at this point it's going to be a check call. So if we check here and he bets, I think we're probably going to be a call, and that is the case. So you kind of think about, if the king would have helped him and given him a king X hand, I think he would have continued betting. But since he didn't, he probably doesn't have it, and we do have a value hand. We basically have a bluff catcher. To catch all the times that villain's going to be betting his missed hands. You could see that he does betting some of his 9x hands. The weaker ones, kind of turning them into bluffs. So overall, it looks like I shouldn't have been betting this as much. That we needed to look at like scaling back our c bet range and really just kind of saying, okay, well, we're going to bet like sets and straights and 2 pair, but not even betting all of them, and kind of flipping a coin or looking at your watch and saying, if the second hand is between 30 seconds or less, we're going to check. If it's greater than 30 seconds, we're gonna bet, and that's a decent way to kind of get a randomization figure. And I think you would tend to do that with your flush draws and your straight draws, but this time you're not betting them at 50-50. Now you can say, well, if it's from 15 seconds or less, you bet. If it's greater than 15 seconds, you check. Something like that. And I think that was a mistake in this hand. I think at least the thought process. My thought process had the mistake that I think I'm c betting too much. So I need to scale it back, check, probably go check call. If it goes check, check, then we're probably going to start betting, betting our middle card. And I don't know if we looked at that. So yeah, let's look at that. If it goes check, check, that's the other possibility. I kind of assume if I check, he's going to bet and we call. But if it goes check, check, and a king and M comes out, then I think at this point you can see that we're betting, I guess 60% of the time, we're betting our 10-9, some of the time, but we're betting our flushes, we're betting our straights, we're betting our sets, 2 pair, over pair, top pair. And again, we're going to have to not bet all of them, but we're betting our pocket pair less than the top card. It looks like we're betting our middle pairs as well. We're betting our flush draws, including the weak flush draws. You're betting open enders, gut shots, and everything. Once it goes check, check, I mean, we already gave it away that we have a weak hand. And once he checks behind, it kind of suggests that he has an even weaker hand. So now we're going to bet. If he calls here, which he should call about 60% of the time, then our nines we're going to check, but anything like top pair plus we're going to bet for value. And I think if we bet for value, we're targeting villain's hands of those under pairs. So I'm going to move that out of the way. So by the time we get to the river, if he was playing it, we bet we're like when it goes check check and we bet that turn, I think villain's going to more likely call with all of these weak pairs. He'll have all those in his range, and once he calls a turn, I would bet he'd probably call those again. So that's why we would kind of bet again with our top pair, try to get him to call. Maybe not all the low ones, maybe just he calls with the 9. And that's why we kind of don't bet with our 9, because it's kind of, I think, our break-even point. Half the time we'll probably beat the calls, and the other half we don't. All right, so this is a long one. Made some mistakes in this hand. Had some mistakes in my thinking. So hopefully you enjoy this hand. If you're wondering, I am going to try to make a video on how to set up these ranges. I'm going to show you how I got them color coded. If you're wondering about that. So hopefully you enjoy this. If you do, look tomorrow for another.